Welcome to Margaret Moorhead's Virtual Trunk Show. We're going to be going through a lot of different projects today, and you're going to get a brief explanation of how those projects were done. We'll be talking about a few techniques, but basically what I want you to do is grab yourself a glass of wine if you want, sit back, relax, and be inspired. Start over here with our Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble. The Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble is from the Virtual Success 1 series, which is one of my online classes. The first project is this beautiful towel wrap. Now this towel wrap is dead set easy, but extremely elegant. So the first thing we'll talk about is how to make the band. The band is comprised of a whatever width fabric you want that has batting on the back. And then the binding is what's really cool on this. What you'll do is you'll take a piece of fabric that is as wide as your band, plus enough to create the binding, plus enough for a little bit of a hem on the back. You'll stitch your binding fabric or your faux binding fabric along the top, flip it up, that's what gives you your binding, bring it all the way down the back, and then you'll hem it. But before you hem it, you're going to go ahead and add some beautiful prairie points. These are created with the Quick Point Prairie Point ruler, and this is a 1.5 inch prairie point. Then you'll embellish it using the beautiful embroidery decoupage technique. These designs are from Margaret's Magnificent Melody, and that's the same design pack that we're going to be using on all of the projects from the Bedroom Bouquet. So let me just set this down here, and we'll move on to project number 2. Now, project number 2 is a wonderful cushion, and it has a lot of similarities to the towel wrap that you saw. It has the prairie points, it has the embroidery decoupage, and it's dead set easy. So on this one, what we did was we added background stitches. And I encourage you to use tone-on-tone stitches if you haven't done a lot of background stitching. So embellish your background fabric, add some prairie points, and do your embroidery decoupage to create this beautiful cushion. Then all you have to do is add a contrast fabric to each side. So very easy to do. Now I don't know about you, but I love to change up my home decor. But I can't always find decorator fabric that I want to make the cushions out of, and I don't always want to make a whole cushion. So I love this little cushion because it's made out of a plain cotton fabric. But to give that fabric some body and to give it a more elegant and expensive look, what I did was I fused that plain cotton fabric with Jenny's Quilt Magic to make sure that it had some body. Then let's talk about the wrap in the center. This is created from that same cream silk fabric that we used on our other projects, and it's got the beautiful decorative stitches in there. But what's really cool is this little binding technique. So to do the binding technique, you have your rectangle of fabric, and you're going to take your binding and stitch it on the wrong side. So you'll stitch however wide you want that binding to be. Stitch, then you'll flip it out and over to the front and press it. Then you'll go back to the back side, stitch in the ditch, and when you look at the front side, you'll have a row of straight stitching here and you'll have some extra fabric. Then what you can do is trim away the excess fabric and seal that raw edge with this beautiful stitch right here. Then all you have left to do to create this beautiful project is to go ahead and embellish it with your designs from Margaret's Magnificent Melody and use your embroidery decoupage technique. Now again, when I'm doing embroidery decoupage, I go ahead and use free motion, and I use monofilament in the needle and just a regular bobbin thread in the bobbin. Another fun project to do is this beautiful little foot warmer. So I'm going to leave it sitting over here because I think it'll be a little bit easier to photograph. But basically we've got a couple different techniques going on this. We have embroidered directly on the fabric, which is the scrolls. We have embroidery we have embroidery decoupage on the flowers. We've got the Jenny join, and we have the same binding technique that we just talked about. So let's go ahead and look at each of these individually. Here, like I said, we've done the scrolls directly on the fabric. So you'll decide on your placement and embroider the scrolls directly on the fabric, then do your embroidery decoupage on top of those. Here I have 4 scrolls. You can see 3 of them probably. The 4th one is up here. Embroider it directly on the fabric, add your embroidery decoupage. This is 2 scrolls, and the scrolls are from Gracious Impressions, or you can get them in the Heritage book. So 2 scrolls, 4 scrolls, and if we look down here, it's kind of hard to see, but there's 1 scroll here with the point down here, and then I have 2 scrolls up here. 1, 2. So it created a large triangle shape. Once all that was finished, then I went ahead and put my embroidery decoupage on it. Now let's talk about the quilting on this. And I hope it shows up okay on the camera. We've got 2 different types of quilting going on. We have a grid quilt with a decorative stitch, and we have free motion McTavishing. So what we want to do is talk a little bit about how we got this far. You go ahead and do all of your embroidery, then put your backing fabric on it and do the quilting, and then you can add embroidery decoupage, or you can do all your embroidery directly on the fabric, then add your embroidery decoupage and quilt around it. Either way is correct. It's totally up to you. But basically what you want is you want to have 3 pieces or 3 sections when you're finished that are all finished except assembly. So you'll have the bottom piece, there's another top piece way up there, and the center piece, and they're completely quilted together. Then we're going to go ahead and do the Jenny join. Now this is a Jenny join right here, and I want to give you a brief explanation or a quick explanation on how to do this. This is quilted, completely finished. You're going to butt them together right up next to each other so they're just touching. Then you're going to do a zigzag, so 1 swing of the needle is on this fabric, 1 on this fabric. This. These directions can be found in several of Jenny's magazines and in some of her books, so just a quick explanation. Once they're zigzagged together, then take whatever color thread you want, and in this case I used a cream color thread and I did a satin stitch, and that makes the Jenny join very strong. After I did the satin stitch, to add a little bit more detail, I did a decorative stitch on top of that satin stitch, again strengthening the bond, the way these 2 are held together. Then the last thing I did, and these are really hard to see, but there's a little row of circle stitches, satin circle stitches underneath it, and a row of satin circle stitches above it. So just a beautiful way to go ahead and put your projects together. And the benefit of doing this is that you're working with small sections, so they're much easier to quilt. And you have no bulk in the seam because there is no overlap of anything. So a fun little project to do. And then, like I said, the binding technique on this is the same technique that we used on this little cushion here. Now let's move on to this little wall hanging. And this was a fun wall hanging to do. So you can see it's got a lot of different things going on, and we're going to start at the center. So just a brief overview, we've got the center, which is combined pieces of embroidery using Fabricadabra. Then we've got our little sashing, and it has some free motion on it. We've got some crinkling or scrunching. We've got some jumbo rickrack, and then we've got the binding. And in the corners, we have another form of scrunching or crinkling. So let's go ahead and talk about how we got the center embroidery done. When you're doing this, I have 4 different sections, and I have 4 different pieces of fabric that I'm working with. So the first thing you're going to do is hoop your piece of fabric Put as many of the designs from Fabricadabra in the hoop that you can and stitch them out. The last thing to stitch is a cutting line. So right outside here would be a straight stitch, which is your cutting line. So you stitch so you have 4 of these, you'll stitch so you have 4 of these, and you'll stitch so you have 4 of these, and of course 4 of these. You'll then cut on the cutting line and stitch them together. No measuring, nothing. Cut on the cutting line, do a 1/4 inch seam, and it will go together perfect for you. Then what you'll do for this project is you'll have 4 blocks, and you'll stitch those 4 blocks together in a pleasing arrangement. When I put mine together, I made sure I always had them in the same order and then just rotated them to form the design. Once that's finished, add your borders. When that's finished, you'll add your scrunching. Now when I did the scrunching, I used a technique that I learned from Linda McGee. And this was where you took your fabric and you kind of pleated it up. Okay, so if you think of a fan fold, and I'll demo one here, we'll improvise. So I took my fabric and I just kind of fan folded it like this. Then if you think back to when you use a beach towel, if it's got tons and tons of water in it, how you twist and you twist, so this hand is twisting this way and this is this way. You're twisting it all together. Then you'll go ahead and wrap it with rubber bands, put it in water, get it all wet. I'm sorry, you start with wet fabric. So you go ahead and start with the wet fabric, fan fold it, rubber band it together, and then dry it. When it's finished, you'll kind of open it out and fuse it to an interfacing. It could be a knit interfacing, it could be Jenny's Sheer Magic, it could be Jenny's Sheer Magic Plus. You want to fuse it down so that it keeps the wrinkles in it. If you don't fuse it down, there's no way for these wrinkles to stay in there. When doing this technique, you want to use an all-natural fiber if you can. So this is cotton. Then what I did was I went ahead and I just put some embellishments on top of it. This is all done with couching, but you could use decorative stitches if you want it. Once you have this large piece the way you want it, then you'll cut it and add it to your project. The next thing is this jumbo rickrack. The jumbo rickrack is really very fun because, do you know what? It's actually the same technique as when we made the prairie points. So you'll use your quick point ruler, but instead of folding it over to make prairie points, you'll leave it big, you'll leave it open to make the jumbo rickrack. And when you get the prairie point ruler, all the directions are in there for doing the prairie points or the jumbo ruler or the jumbo rickrack. And this is with the 2-inch quick points ruler. So this is 2-inch. The other ones we talked about were 1.5 inches. And then let's look lastly at our corner blocks. The corner blocks use Jenny's Crinkle Magic. And when these were done, basically all we did was stitch a grid. So we went diagonal in one direction, then diagonal in the other direction. And in doing that, I just couched down a piece of the gold glamour or candlelight thread. So you have your layer of silk, you have your Crinkle Magic behind it, couch down your decorative thread, or you could just use a regular straight stitch. When that's all finished, you take your iron and you steam it, and the steam makes your flat silk and Crinkle Magic bunch up to create that wonderful texture on this little corner. So a lot of fun things on this little wall hanging, plus lots of fun things on the other techniques that we've talked about. So lots to keep you going. Before we move over to the other side of the room, I do want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about what we have here. These projects were from the boot camp, which is Virtual Success 4. And the first thing we'll talk about is the little candle wrap. It's made with a sheer fabric, and this was just a little design that if you were in boot camp, you went ahead and got the design as part of the boot camp. So it's a sheer fabric here, it's got a silk overlay, and you put this around your candle and just tie it with ribbons on the back. So a fun little thing, and this is one of those battery operated candles, so it's a lot of fun to have out, and you can just turn it on off, and there's even some that come on timers, so they're a lot of fun to have. The other thing that you see here is a little frame that's been made into a tray and some coasters. The design for the coasters was actually part of the class also, but I'm sure you've seen these before, where you have a circle of fabric and then you have two circles that have been folded in half, and they're stitched around using your embroidery machine and a decorative stitch around the edge. And you don't even need an embroidery machine. You could do those with decorative stitches. Then I love the idea of taking a frame and making it into a tray. So we've got a regular picture frame, we added handles to it, and instead of putting a picture in it, we've put an embroidery in there. So on this one you can see that we've put our rows of decorative stitches. We've got two different decorative stitches going on here. We've got a little, kind of like a crosshatch one, and then in between every other one of those we have a different decorative stitch. So it just gives you a different look, more of a plaid effect. Then in the corners we've used an embroidery design from Beyond Color Purple by Jenny Haskins. And all that was done to get the placement and everything. We used our template magic and some printouts from the computer, made sure it was all the way we wanted to, made sure that it looked the way we wanted it to look, and then went ahead and did our embroidery project. So let's go ahead and move on to some of the things on the other side of the room. If you haven't noticed by now, I love purple. So we've got another little cushion over here, and this was part of the Virtual Success Boot Camp, which is the same class that we did the tray and the coasters and the candle wrap in. This little cushion was inspired by Jenny's heritage book. So there was a cushion or a quilt block that was very similar to this. So what I decided to do was go ahead and create my own background fabric. These backgrounds are from a design CD called Grand Beginnings. And Grand Beginnings happens to be a design CD that I put out. So I went ahead and I stitched backgrounds and cut them into sizes I wanted. And you can see that they're all the same width, but these three are larger in height than these three. So you can design it any way you want. I just wanted it to be a little bit asymmetrical. Now the design CD that I used for this is the same one that we used from the tray, and that is Beyond Color Purple. So these designs are put on using embroidery decoupage, and they're from Beyond Color Purple. The other technique that's on this cushion is the beautiful Jenny Join. And I think this, when you see this, it might be easier for you to see the stitching for the Jenny Join. So a quick review, I butted these two together, no seam allowance, just butted together, zigzagged it together. Then I went over it with the purple satin stitch. On top of the purple satin stitch, that's kind of hard to say, is a little decorative stitch, and on each side of that, excuse me, is a little circle stitch. So it looks like a piece of braid or something has been added to this. However, it's not a braid. It's all done with your stitching. And the great thing about that is we have a million colors of thread, but we have a limited supply of braid in our sewing room sometimes. So just a beautiful little cushion that utilizes scraps of fabric and creates a beautiful, beautiful accent to our home. If we look over to the right here, we have what Jenny calls a doorstop. This project was featured in one of her Creative Expressions magazine, and it's basically a little purse doorstop that has embroidery decoupage on it. Now in her magazine, she used a different embroidery design, but to coordinate the little doorstop with the cushion and the tray, I went ahead and used the same Beyond Color Purple Design CD. So just a fun little accent, and as you can see, it doesn't have to be used as a doorstop. It can certainly just be used as an accent on a table. Now let's go ahead and talk about the beautiful table topper and the candles that you see over here. Now the table topper is also part of the Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble, but we're going to start at the top with our candles. The candles have some beautiful wraps around them. The design for the wrap comes from the Rosebud Design CD, and the embroidery is done on a sheer organza, nylon organza fabric. I stitched out a lot of the designs and then threaded them on a ribbon. The candle on the left of your screen has 3 of the medallions around it. So you can see that there's quite a bit of space between each medallion. I just slid the ribbon on through the buttonholes and put them onto my candle. The candle on the right has the same medallion embroidery on it. However, there are 4 medallions that go around that candle. So they are very, very similar. However, they are not identical. And that's what makes your decorating interesting. Now let's go down to the table topper. This was a very, very easy project to do. Cut yourself a circle and then embellish with the embroidery decoupage technique. So those are all individual embroideries from Margaret's Magnificent Melody that have been stitched around the bottom edge of a piece of fabric that has a serged edge. Very quick and easy to do, and as you can see, the flowers do extend beyond the edge of the tablecloth, so I didn't have to cut anything away. Now if we go down just a little bit further, we're going to see a little rug or a bath mat, again part of the Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble, and those are just embroidery decoupage again, and you could go ahead and stitch those on, or you could do just what I did and you could simply go ahead and glue those in place. So lots of things that you can do. Now you might have seen a little peek of a green and pink quilt that was featured in Jenny Sharman Vintage Garden book. It was a quilt that I did for her, and it was really a lot of fun to do. This quilt has twin needlework on it, piped prairie points, embroidery, and free motion, and of course piecing. The designs can be found in Sharman's Vintage Garden book, and I want to talk about the green texturized fabric that you see there first. What I did was I took a large piece of green fabric, a 2mm twin needle, and a decorative stitch that some people might refer to as a serpentine stitch. I stitched rows and rows of that stitch using the twin needle going in one direction. After I filled up that piece of fabric, I turned it 90 degrees and stitched the same stitch perpendicular to the first rows. Then I had this beautiful texturized fabric which was used around all of the blocks. So let's go ahead and focus on one block and talk about how to create these. The first thing you'll do is take your background fabric, and in my case it was a piece of cream fabric, and I simply centered an embroidery on that block and stitched it out. Next, you'll want to add the beautiful piped prairie points, and at the end of this video you'll see step-by-step directions on how to create those. Then you'll take that beautiful texturized fabric and piece triangles of it to create your entire square. Once you've created the square, you can go ahead and work on the center, and when I did the center, I went ahead and took 4 of those squares and stitched them together to create that large center medallion. There's sashing around the center medallion, there's some beautiful hydrangea fabric, and then the 4 corners are individual blocks. So again, this quilt was really just a lot of fun to do. I love adding texture to the quilts, and that again was done with the beautiful twin needle work. So if you don't have Charmin's Vintage Garden, go ahead and pick up a copy of it, or take this idea and make your own quilt using the same techniques that I did. What we're going to do now is move on to the next section of our trunk show, where you're going to see lots more beautiful projects. See you in a minute.